Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Canada Immigration Live Q&A, sponsored by the 2024 Express Entry Accelerator course. Alicia, how are you doing?
I'm okay, Mark. I'm hanging in there. I'm a little bit grumpy today, I gotta tell you.
Grumpy. Well, you better
It's
elaborate
okay.
on that. What, we have nothing but beautiful weather outside, and it's balmy, and no snowflakes are flying from the sky.
There's another blizzard hitting Alberta as we speak up until Thursday or something like that, maybe Friday. Yeah, no, it's tough. It's tough in the immigration law world right now, and we're seeing a lot of clients who are super frustrated, and I echo that frustration because it is so competitive and uber difficult if you are trying to find a pathway to PR in Canada right now. And it's frustrating because I understand there are cost constraints and government of Canada is trying to process applications quickly. They are trying to make efficient administrative decisions, but it just feels like the individual, the human is falling through the cracks,
Yeah.
and officers have less and less discretion, and it's just largely processed through, initial AI vetting. And if there is the smallest thing wrong with any sort of application, they just don't care. It's just you go back into the queue, and if you lost your chance because you happen to get a draw at a very, very tight cutoff, it's too bad. So it just feels that more and more our jobs as immigration lawyers is to really try to help people navigate this administrative machine that's just crushing and faceless.
Yes. I could not have said it any better than that. All right, those of you who are tuning in for the first time, every week, Wednesday mornings at 10 a.m. Mountain Time, Alicia and I go live to answer your immigration questions. We're both Canadian immigration lawyers. We're based in Alberta, Canada, the best province in the country. And we're here to just give back. So we do have a few little parameters on the answers that we provide. We do not provide legal advice. So if you ask a question, how do I do this? Should I do A or B? How do I immigrate to Canada? So those kinds of questions that are really specific to you, we encourage you to. Well, you'll hear this little triangle sound. I think I've got it here. There it is. That little triangle indicates that's a legal question, and you really need to book a consultation. However, we do our darndest to try to find something within your question that we can answer generally that will be to the benefit of everyone that's watching. And we like to think this is something, in a way to showcase both Holthe Immigration Law, our law firm, but also just to help people avoid all of just the, well, the uncertain information that's out there in internet land. And so we hope we can direct you to the sources of the correct information. We can clarify areas that are confusing and also let you know when there's things happening in the world. And we always start off our live Q&A with a little update on current affairs and Canadian immigration. And let's start off, Alicia, with this right here, which affects international students.
And I would like to put like bold and like exclamation marks and like all sorts of lights around this announcement, because if students don't know this, they are going to run into massive trouble. So we know that under the normal rules, under the regulations in the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, students were historically always only allowed to work 20 hours a week. And the only exception was during regularly scheduled school breaks, which was usually the summer break, spring break, and sometimes around like Christmas. But during the pandemic, the government decided they were going to ease those hours of work restrictions, and they allowed students to work full time. And I understand why they did it, because it was during COVID and some people needed to work and some schools were closed. But that has been hanging on longer and longer and longer. And I don't like it. I think it's a bad policy because it was encouraging students to work more and more. It was allowing employers to have students work without a work permit on their study permit, and people's academic outcomes were suffering. And so they were not able to continue to meet the conditions of their program. And a lot of students didn't realize that work that they were doing while they were a full-time student doesn't count towards your Canadian high-skilled work experience for CEC, for express entry. And so it was a bad thing all around. So I do agree with the policy now of this new notice saying, as of yesterday, as of April 30th, that exception, that ability to work more than 20 hours per week is gone. And students really, really need to know this, that as of today, which is May 1st, you can't work more than 20 hours per week. If you're
Yep.
working more than
20
20 hours
hours.
per week, it is a violation of your study permit, and you can lose your study permit and you can be found ineligible for inadmissibility. So be very careful, please. Make sure that you know this. Make sure your employers know this. Stop working more than 20 hours per week. Right now, it's back to the old rules.
Yeah. And then the projection, everyone, is that in the fall, not right now, not currently, they intend to change the hours so that students may work off campus up to 24 hours per week. I'll be honest, Alicia, with 3 kids in university right now, I don't know how you can have success with the workload that is required in post-secondary studies, at least legitimate post-secondary studies. I can't speak to any of these fly-by-night schools that surfaced in this whole vortex of international students in Canada, the education. But if we look at our public schools and our and the well-respected private schools, it's a heavy workload. And I don't know how someone could work even 20 hours a week and still succeed and do as well as they could in school without it. And I know that it's becoming very quickly a program of the elite, when you need to have a little over $20,000 just as a base before you can even come, in addition to tuition, books, and other things. So I recognize that. But if you're here to study, you want to do as well as you can. And when you make a decision to work, and sometimes when you don't have sufficient money to support your studies, the desire and need to work is overpowering. And then it just leads to a mess, unauthorized work, even falling, afoul of the study permit conditions. When people, sometimes without knowing, reduce their course load down to a few courses, not understanding that they're no longer considered full-time students. And then it's just a disaster. So, so the whole ability to work off campus has always been, it's been an attractive feature of studying, because I don't believe the US allows for it, if I'm mistaken. And I remember, and I don't want to say anything with respect to U.S. immigration law, because I'm not a U.S. immigration attorney at all. But Canada has very favorable rules. And so it almost lends itself to, people coming when maybe they don't have the resources. And then that's when all of the problems start to surface.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Mark, because if you scroll down to the bottom of this news release, so keep in mind, everybody, it's not 24 hours yet. It's still 20. It is back to 20. If you keep scrolling down, it talks about they've done studies about what are the academic outcomes, that anybody working 20 hours, 28 hours per week has negative outcomes. Anybody working more than 24 hours has negative outcomes. It talks about the Australian program. It does say that in the US, students need to meet additional criteria before they're permitted to work off campus at all. And so these are some
Yeah.
of the things that I'm glad the government is doing. What I wish the government would have done is give people some notice, right? They
Yes.
didn't tell anybody that this was coming. They just all of a sudden dropped this notice, and there's not a lot of information, I don't think, hitting the news right now to highlight the fact that employers, as of today, cannot be hiring students anything more than 20 hours a week. And students then, like, don't wait for your employers to realize what's going on with the change in the policy. The law has to be followed, and it's up to you individually to go talk to your employer and say, as of May 1st, I cannot work more than 20 hours, and you've got to police your schedule, and you've got to keep track of exactly how many hours per week you're working and be able to justify that. Because if an immigration officer is going to be auditing your PR application and they find you've worked too many hours, you're not going to be able to count. Um, well, you could potentially lose your study permit is also one of the issues. So make sure you start charting. Make sure you limit yourself to 20 hours during regularly scheduled school terms, and only you can work more hours during regularly scheduled school breaks.
And It's interesting as we've watched this evolution of immigration programs and policies. Um, Today, we're going to be dropping another video, another episode of the Canadian Immigration Podcast, episode I think 141, on the recent suspension of the self-employed PR program and a significant reduction in cap within the startup visa program. And sometimes the success, Canada's success in terms of attracting immigrants, actually turns into its downfall when it comes to the management of programs. And it's hard when there's a lot of real significant interest in coming to Canada, figuring out who are going to be the winners, who are able to come, and who won't be able to and will be the losers. And decisions have to be made, difficult decisions, to try to manage all of these programs when Canada is a very attractive country to come to. And because of its success and now the challenges that we're seeing, it's having the opposite effect where we're seeing more and more people saying, don't go to Canada. There's all these problems. It's not what it used to be. So we're hoping, and I'm always maintaining optimism that if we, if sometimes difficult decisions have to be made now to make things better in the future. But it doesn't change the fact, like Alicia said, that the government could do a better job of announcing. Imagine if you've got, as an employer, a schedule that's all built up and you've got the hours allocated to all your employees and you have a fair number of temporary foreign workers, that are international students. And now, you're left with the reality, oh my goodness, now I need to restruggle my shifts and reorganize. So I'm not quite sure why they do that, but it's their policy. There's big splashes when they're announcing something new, and then they don't roll it out for 3 or 4 months later. But when it comes to shutting programs down, they don't seem to need to. They're not too concerned about having a press release with our fine minister here to tell everybody that, although he did go live and talk about this. Yeah, that's just the nature. It's always better to do, release bad news quietly than to have a big fanfare. So yes, now let's talk about the elephant in the room, Alicia. And that elephant in the room is the rounds of invitations and the exuberant nature that our federal government has in releasing francophone only draws. So Alicia, let's slide over here to the round of invitations and let's just address this because we've got questions piling in already on this. What are your thoughts and what's your take on the fact that yet again, we have had our last draw last week was French language category based draw once again. So what are your thoughts on that as we look, back at the rounds of invitations here?
So it's really difficult right now. I have clients who are PhDs who have been working in Canada on postdoctoral work permits for over a year, who have CRS scores of over 500, but not at the 529 range because it's basically superhuman, who are having to go back home because they can't get an ITA at above 500. But then, of course, if you happen to have French, then people are getting invitations at 336, right? And so I I don't know. I question the policy around, is there a better economic outcome for people who happen to be bilingual versus somebody who has already worked in Canada, who has employers in Canada, who's accumulated Canadian work experience, who has high levels of education? It's hard for me to see how that makes sense from a policy decision. But it is what it is. So that's where we're at right now. And what we are hoping, and there did seem to be a few little crumbs that the minister was dropping about trying to find a pathway to PR for people who have been in Canada and have Canadian work experience. Like, I think they can save this by having a CEC draw, right? Because I think it is only fair to say there are strong economic outcomes for people who have accumulated work experience in Canada. And if you have a CEC draw, there has not been one since September of 2021, but if you had at least a few CEC draws per year, it would go a long way to garnering a little bit of goodwill again with people who've been working in Canada.
Yes. And I agree, Alicia, with that. A few weeks ago, the minister had indicated their desire, at least at this stage, we'll pull Minister Miller on here. He had indicated and hinted in some of his news releases, his press releases, that there was going to be a greater focus on the folks that were here in Canada, which in my mind suggested that it would be CEC draws that would be filling that gap. Obviously, that's the one single way you can target people that are already here, but yet we look at the rounds of invitations, Alicia, and we can see, we'll pull the minister off here. You can see that there are still general draws. Like, why would this not be CEC? I just don't get it. What advantage do you have other than not having to do PNP draws? So if you do a general draw, you don't have to do a PNP only, because it's inclusive. But when I look at this, and yes, a general draw does include CEC as well. And I guess realistically, Alicia, if you look at the candidates and if we go back here to what the pool looks like here with how, and this was the day before, so April 23rd, I think it was the day before this round of invitation number 295 occurred. And if you look at the totals and the scores, you can't get into this range here of 500 to 600. Like you can't unless you have a job offer or Canadian work experience, or of course you speak French. It's not possible. And so individuals that are in Canada already, and with the rounds of invitation levels being in the upper level of this 500, I wish they would now break this down into 500, the way by tens, 500 to 600. It's interesting. They used to only do 400 to 450. And then they started doing, the 450 upwards, breaking it down by tens. But yeah, it's when you look at where the government is going, I think if they were to do a CEC draw, Alicia, and I'll just go back here to we'll go back to the main, the overview of the rounds. Just give me 1 second here. I can pull this up again. If we go back to the previous rounds and look at it, if we were to look at this 529 as the lowest, I'll be honest, I do not see that coming down significantly more with the CEC right now, the way the rounds of the way the candidate pool is stacked. That if you've got a master's and you've got 3 years of foreign work experience and you're 29 years old and you have a CLB9, you're at 469. But people, when they come to Canada, they've got their undergraduate degree, and then they have the 2 years of Canadian work experience. They are getting similar, and good language, they're getting similar scores. And then they add on the 40 points for, or the 50 points or whatever for Canadian work experience. That's what's pushing people up into the 500s. And so I don't see, even with the CEC, they'd need to do a few to start to pull it down. And even then, French, like, I still don't understand why this exists almost. If you truly want French language, and you can marry it together with high human capital just by leaving it within the general draws, because they're already getting 50 points, which is pushing them up into that echelon right there. So those are my thoughts. And I'm curious with all of you guys out there, what your thoughts are. So, Syed, you're asking us to comment on the CEC draws and what the future holds. What are your thoughts on this? Like, why do you think the government is not issuing CEC draws? Are they just waiting to try to get people out of the country? That seems like it just doesn't match with, the direction that we want to go as a country. But are they just not doing CEC draws because they want to call out people out of Canada, that they feel like there's too many people that are not in the areas, that are creating this most significant economic benefit? I just don't know. I also want to let people know, when you post your comments, please post where you're tuning in from. Usually I tell people to do that. If you're new to this, I love to see where you're tuning in. So go right now and post in the comments where you're tuning in from, and we'll give a few shout outs and then we'll jump into the question. So we've got Skirmishes here. He's watching live from Ghana, still waiting for a trades draw. And yes, I can see as you get older, once you hit 30 years, you're starting to lose points. So I get it, Skirmishes. That's 100% the case. Super, super. I know lots of people are just wondering if there's ever going to be a possibility. We've got the Geek Vancouver. You're very welcome tuning in on our Canadian Immigration Institute Facebook page. Great to have you. Karen says, good morning. Thank you for answering my questions last time. You're welcome, Karen. Watching from Oakville, Ontario. Great to have you here. And let's see if we've got a few others here that are posting where they are tuning in from. Luo, don't know where you're from, but you're very, very welcome. All right, let's see here. And we do have one super chat. We'll pull that one up right now. Bibu says, Bibu007 says, Mark and Alicia, good afternoon. I got nominated for the OINP under the Human Capital Priority CEC stream. Do I need to provide proof of funds in express entry? Thank you. So CEC, express entry, nomination through the Human Capital Priority stream, and proof of funds.
Mm-hmm. So what Mark and I normally do, and this is outlined in our course as well, is make sure that you are demonstrating that you're meeting all the eligibility criteria for the province. So depending on province, they always have settlement fund requirements or economic establishment requirements. And so that's something that always needs to be met, and you need to carry that through to the PR application. However, if you do have CEC, and that's what the nomination is coming in under, I would be surprised. Normally it comes in under PNP when you look at your actual ITA. But keep in mind that under CEC, or if you do have arranged employment points that you are validly claiming, and you have a work permit that is currently active, if you look at the program delivery instructions for proof of funds, it says you don't need to provide proof of funds if you have a nomination, an ITA under CEC, or if you've got those valid arranged employment points. However, to be safe, it's always good to upload a letter of explanation that talks about how you meet the program eligibility requirements for the provincial nominee category that you were invited under, and that you meet the settlement and income sometimes requirements for that stream.
All right, let's slide over here. This is Anatoly, says, hey, Mark and Alicia, tuning in from England. Looking forward to finally completing my landing in just 2 weeks. That is awesome. We need something to celebrate here, Alicia. So let's give some applause for Anatoly. I don't know if I have my, let's see, I wonder if this works. It's my computer's a little bit slower, so some of my visual effects are working and some are not. So we'll see if that loads. Hopefully I haven't frozen everything here trying to load it up. Oh, maybe I shouldn't have. I was going to give, oh, there it is. There it comes. We do have some confetti there for you, Anatoly. So, so congratulations. That's awesome. All right, let's give a few more shout outs here. Spidey's back. Taipei, Taiwan. Good to see you. And you know, you're a good example, Spider-Man, of someone who had invested everything, exhausted every possible avenue, and just the points were just a little bit short, right? And so keep our fingers crossed that maybe some opportunities arise for you to be able to come back. But I've got full respect for you, my friend. You know, you did what you needed to do. You complied. When your status was expiring, you went home. And I think if you want to preserve an opportunity for you to stay long-term, that is what you do. And then you look for future opportunities. But the last thing in the world you guys ever want to do as your work permit's expiring is to listen to anyone who tells you, oh, just stay. The minister is going to institute some policy that will save you, like they did in the past, including Minister Miller, really no, but Minister Fraser here hiding in the background. Those 18-month work permit extensions really came in and rescued people that had allowed themselves to fall out of status. And Minister Fraser is nowhere to be found these days. Under Minister Miller's rule, he's having to now make the tough decisions. So just realize that yeah, staying in Canada out of status and hoping for some faint hope clause is not something that you want. Absolutely, it's not. All right, we've got Pastor Raymond from Ghana. Welcome, great to have you here with us. We've got Rampton, one of the students from Cyprus. Yes. And speaking of students, I want to just let everybody know the new sponsor of our podcast here and our of the podcast and our live streams here on YouTube is our Express Entry Accelerator. If you've not had a chance to check it out, please go do. This masterclass that's associated with the course itself, which has over 60 individual lessons to guide you through the whole process. Every 2 weeks, every Wednesday from 4 to 6 p.m., I do a masterclass. It's really an opportunity for you to ask me anything in addition to the course materials. So go check that out. There is a description. In the description is the link. So great to have you here, Ramton, one of the students. Excellent. We've got Alicia, who is watching from Mexico. Great to have you here. We've got Zumair, who is tuning in from North Whitby. So recent graduate and worried about the future. Alicia, should Zumair be worried about the future in Canada?
Well, I think Zumair should be very strategic, right? It's kind of we're past the point where students could just graduate and kind of wander for a bit. You've got to make sure that when you're graduating, as soon as possible, you've got that high-skilled job set up. And ideally, if you happen to have something in STEM or something in healthcare, and you can make sure that you're starting to accumulate those 6 months of full-time equivalent Canadian high-skilled work within those specific NOCs, that's going to give you the most strategic way to try to qualify for a targeted draw. Of course, you've got to meet the minimum eligibility criteria as well. So if you don't have a year, 1 year continuous in one NOC that you're picking as your primary NOC from outside Canada before you came for your studies, you're going to have to meet 1 full year of CEC eligible work experience before you can claim those 6 months and be eligible for a targeted draw. So, it's tough for students who just went directly from high school to a program in Canada. They need to meet those minimum eligibility criteria either for FSW or for CEC before they can get their express entry application in the pool.
All right, let's pull up next question. This is from Shalia. Good morning, Mark and Alicia. I just want to ask, is there any chance to get nomination from the Alberta PNP if you have a family connection in Alberta, even though your job is not in priority demand list? Thank you. So maybe you can just touch base on the Alberta Advantage Immigration Program. We have another person asking about the accelerated tech pathway as well. But maybe you can just talk briefly about what's happening with the Alberta program right now.
So Alberta is tough right now. There is a large demand. There's a backlog of applications that are in the queue for the Alberta programs, and we know as of a bit over a month ago that they just completely shut down Alberta Opportunity Stream. So AOS is not accepting any more applications. So really the only draws that are happening are through the Alberta Advantage and some of the accelerated tech. So these are the ones for last year. And if you scroll down, it'll have the ones for 2024. So this is the application processing by volume that's currently happening for 2024. So you can see AOS, nothing has been happening, right? So they're only assessing old applications and they have a lot. Keep in mind, Alberta only has a little bit less, like 9,750, but we don't know exactly what the number is for this year. And half of those approximately are through the queue already in AOS. Right now, we still have almost 1,000 applications under the Alberta Express Entry pathway. So they have been doing draws through the Alberta Express Entry, but they are looking specifically at priority sectors, dedicated health pathways. So those ones and the accelerated tech are the ones that are really only getting a little bit of traction. The last time they had a family connection and occupation in demand was the end of December of 2023. So it is becoming more and more competitive to try to get those few spots, like there's not very many spots left for 2024 for the Alberta PNP programs.
Yeah. So I'd like to say that this is just an Alberta issue, you guys, but it's not. We will be hearing in the coming weeks and months more and more programs with the various PNPs across the country being suspended, like Alberta's Opportunity Stream. And I'd also suggest that the rural renewal stream is completely oversubscribed just the same, but they have not yet made the decision to cap that or shut it down. And so communities don't have necessarily limits on how many they can use. not like the Rural Northern Immigration Program. Alberta has Claresholm as one of our communities that's a participant in that program. Those have caps on the numbers that they can issue, but right now the rural renewal stream in Alberta doesn't. And but I suspect that it's going to happen pretty quick. So you look at this situation when programs are closing, people try to find whatever avenue they can. We get it, you guys. This is what we do every day. We have consultations with you guys, and there's links in the description below. All you have to do is come to our website, click on speak to a lawyer, book an immigration consultation. It'll take you right here where you can book a consult with Alicia, myself, and Igor. And so, and if you want to see what other people, their experiences with this, you can always just click on our Google ratings and check it out right here. But the reality is, it doesn't matter which program or which province you're going to, whether it's Alberta or a different province. The reality is there are so many people vying for these spots that where there are no intake restrictions, they're going to be suspended. They're going to be closed, and so that they can process, because the limitation is on the overall numbers that each province has. And if they don't have a cap per se, well, the only mechanism to slow down the flow so that people are not waiting 5 years to have their nomination issued, which is not a feasible solution, they have to suspend the program. And so, Alicia, what do you think the future holds for the Alberta programs, especially the Alberta Opportunity Stream, when it is more open-ended on the front end? Do you think they're going to open it up in January and have a race to file? Or do you think they're going to change the intake to restrict who's eligible?
Mhm. Yeah, I think they're going to change intake and they're going to make it harder. And that's the way BC is moving as well. So if you look at notices from the BC PNP, they are saying, wait a minute, we are having changes to the international grad category and the graduate stream. So postgrad. So people who have graduated from programs in BC, those programs are going to be limited. And the nice thing about BC is they've actually told people this, it's on their website right now. So you've got to be very careful in terms of which kind of programs in BC. We know that, of course, we have caps on study permits. And so you've got to get one of those coveted spots, or you've got to be in a master's or PhD program. But for most of the BC PNP programs for postgrads, they are now limiting eligibility to certain master's programs from certain universities. And in the most cases, people will require a 4-year bachelor's, not just a 1 or 2-year post-secondary diploma. So that's going to get harder. And the other thing that's happening is they are upping the language requirements. So for a lot of those student categories, you've got to have CLB 8 across the board now.
That's the only thing that they can do when the demand for the programs far outstrips the supply, the availability of spots. That's what happens. And that's why we see the CRS scores going so high. That's why we see each of the individual job offer streams in the various provinces that have their own tabulation of human capital points. We see all of those pass marks going up and up, and it doesn't matter whether it's Saskatchewan or whether it's British Columbia or Ontario or wherever. It's super, super competitive. All right, let's shift gears, Alicia. We've got another super chat. This one's from Shirag. He says, Mark and Alicia, can I count 2 of 5? So you can see this is where we ring the bell here, Shirag, and encourage you to slide over and book a consult. But we can talk about this generally. So can I count 2 of 5 weeks I worked from abroad fully paid? So they're trying to squeeze out 2 of a total of 5 weeks abroad as vacation time towards meeting the 1-year experience requirement for CEC. Found IRCC website statement proxy for in Canada element to be confusing. So we can't speak to that reference on proxy. I'm not sure. Rarely do I go and dig, but they have offered some indication as to what would be considered a reasonable, people are entitled to vacation. So that's a normal thing. I remember in one national conference that I did on express entry, the government official that joined me had indicated that 3 weeks of paid vacation would not be unreasonable, and that most officers, although they have discretion, would consider that to be work. But when it comes to this situation, like I said, Shrug, we can't answer directly whether or not you can claim it. We need a whole lot more information. But Alicia, maybe you can just speak generally to this concept.
hmm And so, and there is some sort of, I think it might be through one of the FAQs or one of the operational policy interpretations of Canadian full-time work. Um, they do talk about, people take vacation, and they don't say how many weeks on the website. They just say, it's up to the officer's discretion to consider in the context of your express entry application how many weeks of work you have and how many weeks of that could be vacation. I'm glad, Chirag, that you say that yes, it is fully paid. So that is absolutely a requirement. So if you are taking unpaid leaves right away, you cannot for sure count that as your Canadian work experience. If it is paid and you can say, well, I only need 2 of these weeks to count towards my full 52 weeks. Oh, there you go, you found it.
I did.
Um,
Yeah.
mhm. So this is where they say, you know what, a reasonable amount of vacation time. But they're not going to hold themselves to anything. They're going to say, for example, a 2-week period within a 52 weeks is usually going to be reasonable, but you're going to want to make sure that it was paid, that you were fully engaged, that you came back to the employer, have a little letter of explanation about that. And of course, you can't say, oh, so what they're saying with the in proxy here is that um, if you needed to have an in Canada element and you're trying to work remotely, you can't do that. You can't start saying, I'm going to stay outside of Canada and count that as Canadian work experience if you're not physically in Canada. That's what they're talking about with the proxy.
All right, let's get to a few more here. Okay, let's see what is next. Okay, Bruce has got a few here. He says, good morning. And then he says, how much do you charge to do an LMIA application? And then he says, if I want to solicit your service, how can I contact you? So that's kind of all encompassed in one. And it's really easy, you guys. Just remember, Holthe Immigration Law is our law firm. And all you need to do is go to the firm site and everything is there, including, when it comes to fees, we have the individual fees that are broken down. Business is a little bit different because it depends on the nature of the application. And so even when it comes to labor market impact assessments, Bruce, we don't quote a fee on that because it depends on the nature of the position that we're, assisting the company with. Sometimes more technical positions might be easier, whereas more general positions might be more difficult and require more effort and more work. So it just depends. We have some fees set with some companies where we do larger volumes, and that's why business immigration services we don't have quoted fees. But it all starts with a consultation. So no matter which route you go, speaking to a lawyer, booking the consultation, and then transitioning to whatever service it is that ultimately we decide is the one that's best suited for the immigration needs. That's how we deal with it. So thanks for asking that, Bruce. Okay, we've got another super chat that slid in here. Life with Tears says, what is the approval rate of my ICT, a functional manager? Oh, I love those. Application. I'm being transferred by my company, real estate in the US, from Philippines, real estate in US, from Philippines to Canada. I also studying masters in PH online. Will that impact the application? So this is absolutely one of these. You've got a lot of moving parts here, but Alicia, I can talk briefly about the whole concept of functional managers. So when it comes to intercompany transfers, generally speaking, the parameters are pretty straightforward. If there's a relation between, a corporate relationship that exists between the sending and receiving company, that it's a subsidiary, a branch, or a affiliate enterprise, then that has the foundation for the intercompany transfer. Individuals need to be managerial. They need to be employed for 1 year outside of Canada before they're transferred, and to be in a senior executive or senior managerial position. So when you talk about a functional manager, typically what we're referring to is an individual who doesn't necessarily manage people, but they manage a particular department or a division within the company. And ultimately, every single one of these applications turns on its own facts. So it all comes down to how you demonstrate that role. Now, as far as being transferred from, I can't tell if it's, you said real estate, like obviously the burden is on you to be able to prove it. And as immigration lawyers, this is what we're retained to do, to help craft the legal submission, the employer letters of support that break down eligibility and demonstrate to an officer how you meet the requirements. As far as studying masters in PH online, I don't know if that's public health or what PH stands for. I'm not sure. But whatever that is, and I'll just pull it on the screen really quick here. Yeah, I can't, will it impact the application? Well, understand that if you're studying and you're full-time and you're saying that you're working, it all comes down to the genuineness of what you're trying to do. So remember, as we go forward, this is not something we can tell you to do at all, or give you advice on. I hope that your company has retained quality counsel that can assist with it. But yeah, Alicia, I don't know if you have any other additional pieces to add other than I recommend you book a consult to chat with us.
Yeah, I think Leif is saying that they're studying their master's in the Philippines
Oh,
online.
Philippines
Um,
online. Thank you.
yeah. But what I would say is I've had a number of consults with people who've reached out in very similar situations. So they have some company who has company lawyers who are trying to do this application for them under ICT. And I think it's perfect if you reach out and book a consult with Mark or I, because we can give you some practical advice on, this is your application. And it's really important that even if the lawyers for the company are doing it for you, you understand exactly what's being submitted in there and that you have vetted it for accuracy, that they're properly claiming your work experience, for example, your personal history, your education history, because it's really important that they get that application right because it's your application. It's also important that you see it before it gets submitted, because a lot of the companies will just submit it for you and sometimes you don't have a proper chance to read it and review it and sign it. So be careful with that. And yeah, this whole world of functional managers is tricky, because if they're pushing the envelope and they're trying to say, you're managerial level, but you're not actually managing people, and it's not proprietary and there's not enough specialized knowledge, then there's a risk that that application can get refused. And you want to be careful that you're not misrepresenting the situation because it is your application.
Yes. All right, let's shift back to the Alberta program just briefly. Luo or Lara says, Alicia and Mark, would you please explain the Alberta Advantage Immigration Program Accelerated Tech Pathway? So what I'm going to do here, Lara, and she also asks, what documents does an employer need to show about the industry, the NAICS code of the employer industry? Well, I want to direct you guys back, if you're watching, wherever you're watching, LinkedIn, if it's X, if you're watching in Facebook, on the YouTube channel, all of these videos are here and they're pretty easy to search. So I just typed in tech here in the search field, and then I was able to pull up this video right here, the AINP. Of course, you can see the name has changed since then. The Accelerated Tech Pathway, learning why this is a fantastic new for the tech industry. So this video right here is really good at breaking down the ins and outs of it. But I'll be honest, if you go to the main site and you look at the streams, and you can see pretty much, it gives a pretty good idea as to what they're looking for in terms of each of these programs. And so, yeah, you can come here and it will give you a little bit of insight. Yes, Alicia, you've got something to add?
I'll, I'll just give you like a high level snapshot. You've got to have a valid express entry profile. You have to meet the eligibility criteria for FSW or CEC. Once you have that profile, then you're going to put in this application under, or notice of interest. There's a form that you have to do for Alberta Tech. So Alberta Tech is a subset of meeting the regular requirements for Alberta Express Entry. So you've got to meet all the requirements for Alberta Express Entry, which means you've got to have the federal profile, meet all the requirements for Alberta Express Entry, and then meet the extra requirements for Alberta Tech. And so the Alberta Tech stream means that your employer has to be in this NAICS code. And if you're saying your employer has a number of different streams of business lines and you're not sure which one, then it's a self-declared process. So the employer basically has to tell the Alberta Advantage Immigration Program, AAIP, yes, we meet this NAICS code based on this line of business. So they're basically self-representing, but you do want something from them to put forward what NAICS code that they think they're properly operating in.
Yeah. And that actually addresses this follow-up, which was if the employer has several different lines of business, how do you determine which NAICS code the employer belongs to? And so, yeah. Okay. Estef says, tuning in again on my favorite live every Wednesday from Edmonton. G'day, Mark and Alicia. Thank you so much for connecting in. We really, really appreciate your ongoing support. Yukong, I'm going to give him some applause. And let's see if we can also pull in our confetti now that it's loaded up. So, so Yukong says, hello, Mark and Alicia. I'm joining today's live to thank you both for your past helps. My H-1B open work permit was approved for my old passport. Awesome. It's worked out great for me at Montreal Airport. And then he follows up here with the letter of intro and my new passport. I was smoothly issued a work permit valid for 3 years from now on. So just to clarify for people who are wondering what this is all about. So essentially the passport was going to be expiring before 3 years. So the old passport, there just wasn't time to get a new passport, get it updated to the file before the visa was issued for the open work permit and the travel letter issued. But when they got to the airport in Montreal with the letter of introduction that the government issues you when your work permit's approved and the new passport, they were able to get the full 3 years from now. So that's really good, you. Thanks so much for sharing that insight with us. We've talked about this in the past. The government has also indicated that individuals with expiring passports under the H-1B program will have the ability, once they have the new passport, to extend for the full 3 years. That was something we didn't know was going to be happening, but we did see that pop up on the main landing page for the H-1B open work permit program. So yeah, so thank you for sharing that with us. Appreciate it. Okay, this one, Alicia, is for you. It's Hassan. He says, my wife came to Canada on a visit visa and got a job in Fort McMurray on an LMIA. She worked in the family business as a coordinator for 6 years, but did not mention in her application. Can anything be done now? I will ring the bell and I'll turn it over to you.
So Hassan, Mark turns it over to me because I'm the one who always goes
Yay!
on about misrepresentation, and I'm the one who always says you have to tell the truth, and if you failed to tell the truth in the past, it will come back and haunt you. So this is one of those circumstances, right? When you're filling out those initial work permit applications from outside Canada, it is so important that you are not using an agent who's just saying whatever in order to try to get you approved. Make sure that you are responsible for your application and that you know everything that's submitted in there, that you've properly claimed all your work experience, especially now when we have new targeted occupations. Sometimes people didn't even think it was relevant in the past, but now it's super important. So if you fail to do that, if you fail to put work experience on your initial work permit application, and now you turn around or your wife turns around and tries to use that in order to get express entry points for it, there's a legitimate risk that immigration is going to say, you're misrepresenting. You didn't tell us about this 6 years of work experience when you first came to Canada. Why are you putting it on now? And does it actually exist? And what is the supporting documentation that you have to prove it? Did you pay taxes for it? You know, if we call that employer, are they going to be legitimate? So there are a number of things that would cause you to think twice about using work experience that you did not previously claim. If you can legitimately say, this was a mistake, it was an oversight on our part, and we do want to claim it, understand there's a risk of misrepresentation. But if you go forward and you tell the truth and it is what it is, then you've got to weigh the risks of what your options are. And it's important, I would say, for you to reach out and book a consult and give us the full context of what happened and why.
Yes. All right. Stephen asks an interesting question. What I'll do here, let's pull this slide over here. So here's the question that Stephen asks. He says, I have the letter of explanation template from the Express Entry Accelerator class. Do I need to state applicant and spouse in one file and upload it to the client info under applicant's name, or make 2 separate LOEs and upload? This is a great question. And yes, it is focused on this, you guys. And what Stephen's talking about is within the Express Entry Accelerator, the course is just full of, like I said, all the way from the beginning, learning the basics, all the way through to every component of the Express Entry process. Registering for your GC key, understanding eligibility through the programs, setting up your profile. But in module 6, and this is all EAPR after you get your ITA, you can see how many lessons are there. But in module 6, we have a section, and it's actually, I've got even more. It's all for documents, but I'm going to have to go in and pull this up to access all of the others. You'll see that I have a special section on letters of explanation. And we teach and we use with our clients 2 separate LOEs when they're filing their applications. And one is for documents, and the other is when you have information that you want to explain. But when you go to the actual, the EAPR, the landing page, the summary page, and you fill out the information and you click continue and you advance the document checklist. For many years, there was only one spot to upload client information, and that was within the principal applicant. But now there's a spot for additional or optional documents for each person included within the application. So the question here that is asked is this awesome little template and the instructions you give us, and I'll show you one more thing here. Within each of these with the explanations, we have downloads. So I have samples that people, templates that they can use to build out their letters of explanation in a way that I believe makes it as easy as possible for an officer to understand. But the question is, so if now we've got an LOE, which is the best option? And here's the response that I have given probably in more master classes and courses that I've done than any other response. IDRM. It doesn't really matter. And it's true. If you feel like there's a lot that you need to explain for your spouse, you can totally take a letter of explanation, separate it out, and include a separate one for the spouse. If there isn't, or there's just a small, a few little things, you can embed them in both of them into one LOE that's uploaded into your section. But I think overall, there are advantages to separating it out. One is space. So if you need to upload something extra or some additional documents, let's say you're trying to reduce all of your bank statements because you don't have a really good bank letter. So you're trying to upload 6 months of bank statements. And when you reduce the file size and you try to compress it, it starts to get all pixelated and the image quality is quite poor. Well, then you might consider having a part 1 that's included in the proof of funds section, and then a part 2 of the rest of the documents that are then included in the client information section, and you have more spots to upload them. So that may be something that you choose to do. So really, Stephen, thanks. That's a great question. And hopefully I'll see you next Wednesday. So we don't have a masterclass today, but next Wednesday we will have another one. So every 2 weeks we do them. And you guys, when you register for and you subscribe to the Express Entry Accelerator, you have access to this and all future updates for life. And you can come back as many times as you want every 2 weeks to ask more questions. So I literally, Alicia, I hold this sucker up against anything that's out there in terms of value for the money that's spent. And it is me there waving at you, answering the questions. And so it's thanks, Stephen, for asking that. That's a great question. Okay, I'm just going to jump back to this one here for VK, Alicia, and I'll let you tackle this one as well. So we're getting back to the French draws, and the government has mentioned 30%. So he says, well, what does 30% French draws mean exactly? 30% of which number? And when we go back to our rounds of invitations here, if I can find it, I've got rounds of invitations. I'll have to pull up a new one here. We'll slide back over here and I'll open it up. So when we look at the total numbers here, Alicia, overall that are piling in with the category-based draws and the other rounds of invitations, what are they talking about with this 30%? So if we look at how many French draws we've had and how many, 1,400 here and 1,500 here, and then 2,500 here, and then a big massive 7,000 one in February, 700. And
Hmm.
then, so when we have these, what's your thoughts on the 30%? Is it a nice round
Yeah.
number they've drawn out of the hat and they don't even care, or what?
So it's all tied to their levels plan and how many economic immigrants they are going to accept under express entry in every calendar year. And of course, that's a rolling figure, right? Because they're continuing to process applications throughout the timeline. But if you look overall at the 2024 numbers, they have a target for overall federal express entry. And then they are going to say, okay, in this year, we're going to have a certain number of express entry draws. And 30%, we're hearing, of the draws under express entry are going to be francophone. So only people who are qualifying with their NCLC level 7s and TEF or TCF are going to be drawn if 30% are coming from the francophone pool. And then we know that they are also doing targeted draws in healthcare, targeted draws in transport, agriculture, and the others. And overall, they are moving to more targeted draws and fewer of the general draws based on the allocations that were leaked in that ATIP.
And one thing I'll point out here on the annual levels here, let's see if I can shrink this down a bit so we can see a little bit clearly. One of the things that they've pointed out here in terms, and these are the 2024 to 2026 immigration levels plans. The government is a little bit more transparent than it would seem on the surface. It's just you have to dig to find it. So you can see here the overall planned permanent resident admissions for 2024. The target is 485,000. So this target for 2024, you can see here is that. They indicate that the overall French-speaking permanent resident admissions outside Quebec, this is what they're talking about, they're looking at 26,100 as the target for 2024. So people, what they do then is they'll go and they'll say, okay, all right, well, if we look at the French language, and let's just type this up, and I'm not going to pull up my calculator. Oh, I'm in the middle of my daughter wanting something. Yeah, Alicia, I'll let you keep talking about this for a second.
Sure. So if we look at the screening by category, so we'll filter it by French and we'll say, okay, here's the French language proficiency draws that they have done. It's going to give us a reverse chronological order of how many draws. So keep in mind that the draw numbers are different, right? They fluctuate. So sometimes they're picking 300 people, sometimes they're picking 7,000 people. And so that makes a really big difference in terms of what the CRS is going to be. So if they only pick 300 people at a 486, that CRS is really high. But if they scoop 7,000 French candidates, that's where the CRS goes much lower. And because they did a 7,000 and then very quickly after that, or within the same month, they did another 2,500, that's where we see that 336 CRS coming in because they did relatively close draws under the French language. So
Oh, looks like Alicia just froze there. Okay, well, we'll see if Alicia comes back here. We may have lost her. Let's see if I can go to a one-person web here. Let's see. Yeah, I can. Okay, once Alicia comes back, then we'll bring her on. So a couple things I want to explain and just continue with Alicia. If we look at these totals and we say, okay, there's 26,100 for this year. Sometimes people will go back and they'll look at these totals and they say, okay, well, look, we've got how many so far? I think that's about 12,400 that they have done. So technically they're on track with what they're doing. It's May. And so if they are, if this truly is what they're looking to do overall French outside of Quebec, then, then this is absolutely, they're kind of on track. Okay, we can bring Alicia back here now. Let's just add her in. Okay, and we will pull Alicia back. I'm just explaining a little bit more, Alicia here.
I think we had a power surge and
did
all
you?
the lights flashed and yeah.
Hey, well, the show goes on, you guys. The show must go on. But just as I was saying before, sometimes people have a tendency to count the invitations and assume, okay, these are the numbers. But remember, when it comes to annual levels plans, if they say 26,100 for 2024, this is landings, people who become permanent residents in this year. So there's always going to be a shift in terms of when the invitations are issued and when people actually become permanent residents and land. And so if you look back historically here and you add up the number from last year, and realistically, I think people who received an ITA in July are probably landing in 2024. They may come in sooner, but with about 6 months or 5 or 6 months processing of EAPR, plus up to 2 months to get your act together and submit your electronic application for permanent residence, more than likely these individuals here in the French are up until the end of December are probably going to be added to the 2024. And it's likely that the 7,000 here will be, the early part of this year. Most of these are probably going to be landing in 2024. So, so what does it mean? And what does 30% mean? Well, I don't know, Alicia. I haven't looked at it. Is 26,100, is that 30% of 485? I
Quick,
don't know.
somebody do the math.
Yeah,
Well,
take
and so the
2,600.
interesting thing is, though, the target for last year was lower. It wasn't 30%. It was
Nope.
about 15% for last year.
Yeah, that does. And this is interesting, Alicia, because obviously overall, and this, I don't know if that overall is probably should be factored against the federal high skill. I don't know. But
Mhm.
as far as this 26,100, this number is not 30% of this. That's like
Mhm.
5%, it looks like. So so maybe the 26 is over the economic, and that's the 30% of draws and individuals coming through the high skill. I'm just doing some little math. There's a reason that I am not a mathematician, you guys. Well, these figures are about 24% of the federal high skill. So, there's generalities that they talk about all the time, and I think to a large extent here at VK we've beaten this topic to death. But I think you can see, at least from a guideline perspective, that even with the rounds of invitations, if 30% is really what they're looking at, as far as the draws, well, they could be very well be on target. They could be on target with what they're doing. Personally, I don't know if it's doing what it needs to do from an economic standpoint, like Alicia said, but this is the world that we're in. All right, we're very quickly out of time here, you guys. I was going to try to get to a few more questions. Alicia, I don't know if you spotted anything as the questions were coming in that you'd like us to hit on, or that we should cover. There was, like I said, there's a lot of really, really good questions that were coming through, and we tried to hit on the ones that we felt were going to be the most bang for their buck when it came to everybody tuning in. I'll give a
There,
few last minute shout outs. Go ahead. Yes.
There was one, and I lost my stream when I had to log back on, so
Uh,
I can't remember who it was, but there was one that was asking, if I'm creating my Express Entry profile and I have a job offer and I only have 5 months of work experience, can I claim a year? So be super careful with that. When you're doing the questionnaire, if it asks you how many years of work experience do you have and you only have 5 months, you can only say 5 months, right? You can't say that you have more work experience than you have. A job offer going forward is something forward in time. So if you're not meeting minimum eligibility criteria for FSW or CEC, your profile is not going to be eligible. If you do have a job offer point going forward, then make sure that that company has an LMIA. Take a look at my video or the blog about when you can claim valid arranged employment points for those 50 points. But make sure that you are answering truthfully when you're doing that questionnaire.
yep. And there we go. French with Fatima. All right. Okay, you guys, thank you so much for joining us in this Canadian Immigration Live Q&A, sponsored by the 2024 Express Entry Accelerator. And we've had a few opportunities to share what it's like, but definitely the link is in the description below. Go check it out. Next masterclass is next week, but this is a continual thing. And whether you're at the very beginning stages of thinking about Express Entry, or whether you've received an ITA and just want to make sure you're doing it right, we're here to help. And I also want to point out, on our firm website, we have a ton of information as well that's available for you. So when you go to our website here, obviously you can book a consult with us, but we have our blog and resource section. And in here, in the blog and resource section, we also have the link to the Canadian Immigration Podcast. So definitely go check that out as you're traveling, commuting. It's a great way to pass time. Alicia and I just recorded with Pentea Jafari. And I guess we never really did even talk about that. The fact that the startup visa and self-employed programs have suffered some significant changes. There's a help, They're trying to deal with the backlogs, just like all the provinces who are suspending programs. This is a common theme across all of them. And so if you go to our firm website right here, I'll find it. Here we go. We're just about there. Man, where is it? I guess it's here. When we go to our firm website, you can see we have a ton of information that we're constantly sharing when things new developments arise. And so definitely go check out our blog posts. Alicia and I often will do videos like this, either pre-recorded and released on YouTube or live, where we cover a lot of the different things that are happening in immigration. So definitely go do that. Check out the YouTube channel. Check out all the resources that are here. We have now 894 videos on here. So if you haven't subscribed, please do it, because sometimes the government will announce a change and then, without any, warning, I will just go live, so that I can talk about it almost in real time. So make sure that you go and check that out. But lots of awesome content on here. And when you also subscribe, you have the ability to get notified when we go live. And lots of content, lots of information. One I will highlight for you guys is the future of immigration. If you haven't watched this one yet, Alicia and I, about a month ago, it's about 26,000 views now, but we talk in depth about what the future is going to look like in Canada for 2024, and definitely worth a view. All right. Anything else, Alicia, you want to mention before we wrap this up?
I'm just going to mention that next week, Mark is on his own because I'm heading out to the National Immigration Conference in Montreal. So I will be there and learning about all developments across the country and liaising with a whole bunch of stakeholders and folks about all things immigration. So that'll be exciting. And I'll catch up with you the week after.
You bet. And I think we have, I don't think I've missed it. I think I've got all of the, I think I've hit all the super chats, I believe. I don't believe I'm missing any here. I think we've got them all. Yes. All right. Okay. We'll wrap that up. So thanks so much, guys, and take care. And we'll see you. Well, I will see you next week.